In the original God of War trilogy, protagonist Kratos had very little character development. He basically only had 3 character traits. 1, he was really angry all the time. 2, he responded to every challenge or insult he encountered with immediate and extreme violence. And 3, he was really good at smashing things. He did have good reason for being angry. Ares, the Greek god of war, tricked him into murdering his own wife and daughter, and that's definitely a solid reason for being really pissed off and seeking revenge. However, that anger and the theme of revenge generally are not explored with any level of nuance or scrutiny in any of the games. Kratos doesn't seem to have any self-awareness or willingness to meaningfully self-reflect at all. Kratos never has to question his reasons or motivations, is never confronted with questions of morality, or whether he's doing the right thing, or whether there might be other paths open to him to right the wrong that was done to him and his family. I mean, it sucks that you were tricked into killing your wife and child, dude. That's really terrible. But before then, you were already a merciless warrior, very willing to burn villages down and slaughter anyone you encountered. How many wives and daughters had you already killed, very willingly? How many fathers and sons did you slaughter on and off the battlefield without ever giving it a second thought? Kratos is never confronted with any of these questions, and so neither is the player. Kratos approaches every situation with, "Oh, I'm so mad, smash, smash, smash." All the games care about are these huge, cinematic, climactic, monumental battles against the gods. And these battles are really cool. And hey look, there's even a sexual intercourse minigame. Ooh. These games can feel really juvenile at times. And when I first played them, I was a juvenile, so I didn't care. After growing up playing nothing but Nintendo games where every single character was some goody two-shoes, do-no-evil, selfless paragon of virtue, playing as Kratos, an angry character who didn't seem to care about doing what was right, was actually really exciting. And all those moral and thematic questions can be kind of superseded by the simple fact that Kratos is almost always acting in self-defense. All of these gods and monsters and such are attacking him first. It's an interesting question what the plot of these games would look like if everyone was smart enough to just get out of his way. Maybe he wouldn't have hurt anyone except the handful of evil gods who really deserved it. That is until the 3rd game, when Kratos' actions begin to seem more and more reprehensible. When he stops being morally gray and at least partly justified, and starts doing things that seem very close to being outright evil. God of War 3 is this spectacular, bloody sweep through the entire Greek mythos, where Kratos brutally slaughters every god, demigod, titan, hero, mythical creature, etc. that has ever been mentioned in any Greek story. It's really cool. It's one of the best action video games ever made. For all my criticisms of the plot, I have to admit this is a really, really well-crafted action game. But very early in the game, it becomes clear that Kratos' slaughtering of the Greek gods is affecting a lot more than just him. When he kills Poseidon, a tsunami destroys the coast of Greece. When he kills Helios, the sun goes out. When he kills Hermes, a plague descends on Greece. And this just keeps happening. Okay, so the question has to be asked. Is Kratos' personal revenge worth the millions of lives of all the innocent people living in Greece? What about all those wives and daughters? Do they not matter to him at all? If it was a tragedy when he was tricked into killing his wife and daughter, what is it when every wife and daughter in all of Greece are killed as a result of his actions? The game never meaningfully confronts Kratos with these questions, and so the player isn't confronted by them either. He never deals with these questions at all, even to say that he doesn't care. He just mindlessly trudges from one slaughter to the next. Now, I'm totally cool with stories about morally gray or even morally evil characters. I definitely don't want every video game to be about morally good characters who always do the right thing. That would be narratively boring and inartistic. However, if you're going to write a story about a character like Kratos, you do have to at least discuss it. You have to ask questions. You have to take some kind of substantial thematic position on your subject. What does it mean for us, for you, for humanity, that we might cheer for a character like Kratos? But the writers never ask any of these questions. I don't know if they're unwilling to do so because they don't want to challenge their audience of teen boys with tough questions about the meaning of violence and what it means to choose violence. And in God of War 3, Kratos' slaughter gets less justified as it goes along. At one point, he is confronted by a drunk and miserable goddess Hela. Everything around her has collapsed. Her world and life have been destroyed. She is not a threat here. She's just a broken woman. She doesn't even really try to stop him, and Kratos just breaks her neck. This is murder. This is bad. In this other part of the game, Kratos grabs this terrified woman and forces her to hold open these doors so he can progress through a puzzle. And look, she's naked. Ooh. Again, this just feels so juvenile. The juxtaposition of sex appeal and cruel violence is really uncomfortable. But anyway, to solve the puzzle, Kratos kills her, or at least leads her into getting crushed to death by the door mechanism. And then he just keeps going. Who cares about her? Just another dead wife or daughter on Kratos' journey to avenge the death of his wife and daughter. When I was a teenager and I first played this, I wasn't that bothered by any of this. I was just here for the cool battles, and my empathy glands weren't fully developed yet. But when I replayed this game years later in anticipation of the 2018 Norse mythology reboot of the series, I found it to be really off-putting. I did not enjoy playing as this character. He's a piece of shit, which would be fine, except the writers seem unwilling of writing a morally gray character with any degree of nuance or emotional depth. He goes through the whole series just being angry, smash, 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 have sex. It's really childish. I almost wrote off the entire reboot, but then I read this preview of the game where one of the writers talked about the characterization of Kratos in the new game. He says, Kratos believes that being a god is a disease, and that rage is a side effect of that disease, and he's terrified that he's passed it on to his son. And this game is about Kratos teaching his son how to be a god, and the kid teaching Kratos how to be human again. Okay, so that's really interesting. That sounds like a character with a past of terrible rage and violence, who is going to actually confront that past in a meaningful way, and is going to do so by raising his son to be a better man than he was. I think for a lot of men, that's a really meaningful story. I want to be better than my father. I want my son to be better than me. These are powerful themes that really matter. And this is even more interesting because one of the big reveals in the series is that Zeus is Kratos' father, and he's a pretty shitty and worthless father, who Kratos ultimately kills. So how does that patricide affect Kratos in the raising of his own son? I was still very skeptical of the 2018 reboot, but then it came out and I played it, and wow, I mean really, wow. The 2018 God of War presented a Kratos who had truly matured along with his audience. His original audience of children and teenagers are adult men now, many of them with children of their own. And that mindless violence and rage of the previous games is not acceptable to the Kratos of this new game, just as it should no longer be acceptable to us. At the start of the game, Kratos is already a father, and he has a very poor relationship with his son. The mother has just passed away, and everybody is really bummed out about it. Her final wish was for her ashes to be spread on the highest mountaintop in the land, but Kratos feels his son is incapable of the journey. Bad feelings all around. Then this guy shows up. This is Baldur, son of Odin, and Odin is the head of the Norse pantheon of gods. For narrative purposes, Kratos is essentially being confronted with himself here. Baldur is arrogant, full of rage, mindlessly violent, doesn't care who his violence hurts, and resorts to that violence immediately whenever confronted with a problem. And he's really good at smashing things. This is a younger Kratos. This is Kratos battling his own younger self. Baldur quickly forces Kratos into a confrontation he does not want, setting Kratos and his son off on their journey. Kratos in this game is still pretty angry and violent, but noticeably less so, and noticeably tries to avoid it when he can. He doesn't want to talk about the man he used to be, does not want to confront his past sins, and does not want his son to find out about them. Notably, he keeps the old weapons with which he destroyed Greece hidden underneath his home and orders his son to never go near the hiding place, lest his son discover who his father really is. Kratos does not want to confront his past, but he is forced to do so through his son. There's this moment early on in the game when Kratos and his son are attacked by a troll, and when they defeat it, his son goes crazy and starts stabbing its corpse in a petulant rage. This is a proto-version of the exact kind of mindless, violent rage that Kratos used to lose himself to, the source of all his sins. You can see it in his son already. You can see Kratos seeing it in his own son, and it deeply disturbs him. He needs to set his son on a better path, and he does not know how to do this. Kratos can't be the better example that his son needs because he cannot be the better man that he needs to be until he confronts his own past, which he is unwilling to do. Instead, Kratos and his son both find that better example in stories about Tyr. Tyr is the Norse god of war, just like Kratos was once the Greek god of war. But unlike Kratos, Tyr used his powers to create peace and harmony among the races, and only ever went to war when there was no other choice, when he had to fight to protect others. While Tyr never actually appears in the game, he becomes something of an inspiration to both Kratos and his son, the kind of god both of them could become. And Kratos' son really needs that better example, because almost every powerful person he encounters in the story, like Baldur, are a piece of shit. And when the son finds out that he is a god, that he is powerful too, the son begins to act like a piece of shit, following their example, the only living examples of a god he's ever known. This comes to a head when they are confronted by a wounded Modi. Now, Magnus and Modi are sons of Thor, the famous god of thunder, though in these games he's presented much more poorly than in the Marvel movies. Magnus and Modi had previously attacked Kratos, and Magnus was killed in the confrontation. Modi had run away. Modi reappears later, a broken and pathetic man, beaten by his father Thor, who blames him for the death of his brother. And this is another example of a broken father-son relationship in the series. Modi here is not a threat. He's already beaten, and he's not even really in their way. They could just walk right past him, and then Kratos' son murders him anyway. This is very, very similar to the death of Hela in God of War 3, which is surely one of Kratos' least justified acts of violence in his life. And I don't think that's an accident. Kratos is horrified by what his son has done, because his son is becoming exactly the man he used to be. His son is committing the same disgusting acts of violence as he did. He is failing to set his son on a better path, and he knows it. But how can he confront this disease of rage in his son if he cannot confront his own past? After they get trapped in literally hell, and his son keeps acting like a little spoiled brat, Kratos unleashes this scolding on his son.
You will listen to me and not speak a word. I am your father, and you, boy, are not yourself. You are too quick to temper. You are rash, insubordinate, and out of control. This will not stand. You will honor your mother and abandon this path you have chosen. It is not too late. This discussion is far from over. We are here because of you, boy. Never forget that.
In many ways, this is exactly the kind of talk that a younger Kratos needed to hear from a father figure. This is what he needed to hear to curb his own worst impulses. He needed someone to slap his hand and say, "This is not an acceptable way to behave, and not an acceptable way to treat others." He never got that, and look how his life turned out. Kratos' journey still isn't over though. While he's confronted those rage-filled parts of his son, he still hasn't confronted it in himself. Near the climax, Kratos and Baldur have one final confrontation, and it is crazy. Kratos and his son and Baldur are battling it out while Baldur's mother Freya is trying to stop them by possessing the corpse of this giant, and it's really wild, very cool. The end of this confrontation is really fascinating. Kratos beats Baldur because, of course he does. But for what I'm pretty sure is the first time in his life, after defeating another god, Kratos chooses to let that god live. And it's all at the insistence of his son. This is actual, real, demonstrable character growth. This is a character who has made the same mistake over and over and over in his life, and for the first time ever is choosing another path. But it doesn't end there. Remember, Baldur is Kratos. He is just a younger Kratos. As soon as he lets Baldur go, Baldur continues on his path of violence and destruction. He immediately begins strangling Freya. Kratos grabs him and says, "The cycle ends here. We must be better than this," and kills him. In some ways, this can feel like a contradictory moment. Kratos has just chosen pacifism and compassion over violence, and then immediately turns around and chooses the opposite again. But remember who Kratos and his son are looking up to as an example of a good god. Tyr. Tyr was a god of war. He fought when he had to. He fought to protect others. Kratos isn't going to kill Baldur just for being a pain in his ass, like he did every other person he ever killed. But he will kill Baldur to protect someone else. And when he's finally completed this transformation from wild rage and hate-filled murderer who committed violence without thought or question, into someone who only chooses violence for the protection of others, that's when he's finally able to openly confront his own violent past, his own past sins.
Boy, listen close. I'm from a land called Sparta. I made a deal with a god that cost me my soul. I killed many who were deserving, and many who were not. I killed my father.
That was your father in hell. Is this what it is to be a god? Is this how it always ends? Sons killing their mothers? Their fathers?
No. We will be the gods we choose to be. Not those who have been. Who I was is not who you will be. We must be better.
It's hard to over-exaggerate how unprecedented a moment this is in the history of narrative in video games. The medium of video games does not have the same reputation for meaningful storytelling that books and film do, and that's for good reason. In many ways, video games are still a very, very young medium, and storytelling has never really been the focus. Looking through the history of video games, most stories are just vehicles to get to the gameplay, with rare exceptions. Those kinds of stories which only serve the gameplay tend to be simplistic, tend to lack nuance and complexity, tend to not ask the player hard questions about what's happening on screen. The original God of War trilogy is exactly the kind of simplistic, even childish, story storytelling where all the writers cared about was setting up the next big fight, not caring at all about the meaning of what they were creating, not caring about the questions, not caring about the emotions, not caring about the thematic consequences of their characters' choices, and what they were saying about the world or what we as their audience value. This is the first time in video game narrative history that a character from a narratively juvenile series has gone from a simplistic and mindless vehicle for cool action sequences to being a mature, nuanced, and self-aware character. This is pretty amazing. And I strongly suspect, from a narrative standpoint, that the God of War series should have ended right here. The sequel, God of War Ragnarok, is releasing next week, and maybe I'll eat my words. But I'm not expecting it to tell as meaningful of a story as this game did. Now, as an action fan and a fan of the series, I definitely still want to see Kratos battle it out with the rest of the Norse pantheon. I want to spend more time exploring the world of Norse mythology. I want to see more of all these characters. However, from a narrative standpoint, and from a what does all this mean for video games as a storytelling medium standpoint, I'm not sure what Ragnarok can really accomplish that the first game didn't already. The story of Kratos feels complete to me. I don't think there's much growth left for him to do. If Ragnarok was focused solely on the sun, solely on him trying to be that better man, that better god that his father believes he can be, then that would be a different story. But Kratos, at least according to all the marketing material, is going to remain the main character. And I'm not sure what story is left for him to tell. But hey, maybe I'm wrong, and Ragnarok will knock my socks off. I guess we'll all see here in a week. Oh yeah. Woo. Wee. Woo.